I think the theme of today, of this evening, is I believe we need to look to the past to know how to move forward and navigate into the future. Because I'm sure you would agree that we are in a bit of a state of, of health emergency, and it's not the one that keeps coming on the news multiple times a day, every hour on the hour for CBC and all the other outlets have kind of been pushing this health emergency. And yes, I don't want to kind of, diminish what that is for some people, but overall, the underlying root cause is an absolute confusion, a loss of sense of how to feed and how to nourish ourselves. And, much of my life has actually been spent trying to figure out how to feed myself. And I started when I was 16. Time in your life, you're supposed to have all your youth, all your energy. And I had made a decision at that time that, caused me to actually lose a lot of vitality. And as much as it, I can look back and it's like, wow, like I really took myself on a long path, maybe a few kind of dead ends and detours, hopefully no true dead ends, but, I finally arrived, right? Where I feel confident in the food that I consume every day, knowing that it nourishes me. But it was absolutely not that way. And, along my journey at one time, I'd been traveling in India and I'd come back and I was on this whole kind of vegetarian kick. That's what started it off for me. It's this one decision that I'm going to become a vegetarian. And I feel this conversation is very relevant now more than ever, especially because of this narrative that's going to continue to pick up that, in order to save the planet, in order to avert, climate disaster, I was going to say avoid climate emergency, but, that's already being touted that we are in a state of emergency. For those of you that don't know, our newly elected mayor in Calgary, along with wanting to put fluoride back in the water, she wants to declare a state of emergency, climate emergency, and therefore subsequent actions of who knows what. We've just had, these 30,000 world leaders meet in Glasgow. There's definitely a narrative, a rhetoric about moving forward, with a plant-based diet. And that was my initial inspiration of why I changed my diet. I was born and raised, to two British parents, and the British are certainly not known for their good cuisine. I think it was Mexico recently surpassed, the Scottish for having the, highest case of heart disease. The Scottish are notoriously bad for a very poor diet, though it wasn't always that way, and we're going to get into that. So culturally, the only reliably bad diet in the world, meaning if we want to have good chances, and I'm being facetious here, of getting any of the diet and lifestyle diseases of the world from which we're plagued, which I would say are causing, huge contributing factors to the pandemic, right? If you look at who is most susceptible, who's being most affected by the virus, it is people who are overweight, diabetic. I mean, there's all these diet and lifestyle related conditions, diseases. And when they die, we call them comorbidities, right? And all the top diseases that most people die from, diet and health related, has its foundation in the standard American diet. It is the only reliably bad diet. And unfortunately, in kind of the modernization of the world, everybody want to kind of become first world and modernize and progress. And, as good or bad as that is, that's just kind of the way that it is, that we're losing a lot of timeless principles that has kept cultures all around the world in a very optimal state of health, as we're going to explore tonight. So looking to the past will give us a clue of how to move forward. Not an exact, but a very good clue. So along in my journey, I received some great advice from Dr. Terry Willard. Like I mentioned, I've been traveling in India, kind of, vegetarian, very interested in yoga and meditation, kind of spiritual path, finding myself, that type of thing. But physically very weak, very sick. It was, I got very ill in India. We definitely picked up parasites. My wife got hepatitis. Like, we were there for 6 months, just to give you kind of the idea of our sense of our adventures there is, and this was, well, my daughter's 17 and, we got pregnant while we were there. So, it was like 18 years ago. So things have changed a lot, but really haven't changed that much. For 6 months, her and I, we went and traveled with $1,200 between us, and we came home with change, right? Like, we slept in monasteries. We traveled, the lowest class trains. We ate street food. We, drank the tea and the chai, from the street vendors, that kind of a thing. It's very easy to kind of get those types of travel illnesses, and we were certainly afflicted with it. But anyways, I'd come back and kind of in this state of, not only what am I doing with my life, but how am I, trying to build health? Because ever since I was 16 and I became a vegetarian, even though my diet was not great, honestly, it was not like a standard American diet. My mother, though she did prepare wonderfully, loving meals within the home, she, like so many of us in our culture today, relied on packaged food, processed food, and that's what my brother and I liked. We loved, fast food, junk food, packaged food. The extent of my culinary abilities, where I knew how to make Pop-Tarts, grilled cheese, and microwave pizza. And so, when I became a vegetarian, it was meat, potatoes, and junk food to just potatoes and junk food. And it didn't go so well. So my health went rapidly downhill. I started to have a lot of blood sugar issues, hypoglycemia, and literally just started eating more sugar, more carbohydrates, just to have enough energy to make it through the day. So I knew things weren't going well. I knew I didn't know what I was doing. I was so committed to this ideal, this kind of, well, I got to save the world. I got to change my diet. It's the one thing that I can do. I'm going to go vegetarian. And I was committed to those principles. So I had to try, and it was a long journey to try and figure it out. And, Terry offered some great advice. He says, Malcolm, if you ever get confused about what to eat, just go back to what your ancestors ate. Scottish, like, they don't have a good diet. I'm going to look to them for any inspiration. But of course, that's the modern Scottish diet. If we look to, previous generations before that, they also had actually a very robust health and a good diet that allowed them to successfully reproduce generation after generation. But then something happened, right? There was the introduction of modern and processed foods, and there's very clear evidence that that's really when human health started to deteriorate. And we're going to get into, what are those true core principles of a healthy human diet? I mean, I get it. I've been down all the different rabbit holes, trying this diet and that diet. And from vegetarian, I went to vegan, and then I went to raw vegan, and so many kind of cleanses, fasts, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. It helped me learn through experience, trying these out. But again, come to a place with a lot more solid foundation and insight on how to truly nourish my body. And it was these principles that we're going to dive into that were such guiding posts for that. And what I want to stay away from is anything prescriptive, like you need to eat this, or you need to eat that. I mean, diet truly is so individualized to who we are, the stage of life we're in, where we live, the seasons. There's all these little factors, your mood, right? What you feel like eating, what you have access to, your socioeconomic status. And there's a million things are going to play into this, where it is truly going to be very, very individualized, as it should be. And yet, there are still going to be some common core principles and foundations. Now, yeah, intuitive eating, absolutely. Here. Okay, let's realize I had forgot my pen there. There, spotlight video. Yeah, Rose is saying also had a health crisis after getting a parasite and viral infection on a trip to India. Help change your diet. So, going through these challenges and these struggles becomes the inspiration for learning, right? Like, I'm sure I would be overweight and diabetic, like most of, extended family, had I not gone down that path and changed my diet, because that was certainly the trajectory that I was on, just eating what I was eating. And so, I'm grateful for those challenges. I'm grateful for my parents in the upbringing that I had and the opportunities and the food that they fed me, because it gave me that experience and it gave me that insight to lead me where I am now. If I'd been, one of my friends, Lucas Simmons, she's an instructor here at Lightsoul. She's also a nutritionist. And, she was raised almost more like the perfect diet, right? And it wasn't until she was later in her teenage years that, she said she had to rebel against it. She had, as we often do as a teenager, right? It's about going out on her own. My wife as well, she was raised a little bit more holistic. A lot of her siblings had allergies. So her mom was making, cashew milk back in the 80s and, gluten-free and this and that. And then when she went to university, she was on her own. So she had to kind of figure it out. But there was that element of kind of rebellion, of trying to well, this is what I was raised at, but what does a Slurpee taste like? I've been missing out. We need to go that way and then come to this space. So thanks, Wes, for sharing about that idea of intuitive eating. I do a whole class on what I call intelligent eating, which we're not going to get into today, but just very kind of loosely, it uses this idea of a food scope, right? These lenses. This is an acronym for these different lenses that we can look at food through. So the first one is, how do we make those decisions about what to eat? Literally, right? And so there's 4 different lenses. Just very quickly, just want to set the stage before we get into this one of these here, which is science, obviously, right? It plays a very important role. We can use science to look at foods or diets, what's in food, what are its effects on our body, good or bad, right? We can take that into account, and then that becomes a part of our decision-making process. Culture, in all the ways that culture influences us, whether it is, our standard modern American culture. I mean, it's how we eat, it's what we do. And it's an influence every single day, as well as your ancestral culture as an influence. From, food that you're raised with, brought up with, your grandmother made, so on and so forth, recipes that are passed on. O is others, the influence of others, friends, family. I mean, you could maybe argue that's a little bit cultural, but I'm talking about, anecdotes, that type of thing. Being inspired by somebody else and the path that they're on and going, hey, I'm going to try that. This is really working for Jane, and, I respect Jane, and we're kind of similar, and da-da-da-da-da. We get onto paths by listening to others, seeing what others are doing, and we can learn from them, and that becomes a part of our decision-making process. Personal experience, and this is what Wes mentioned, this is that intuitive, right? That's a whole deep dive that we can get into just by itself. And so those are the influences: science, culture, others, and personal experience that I've really narrowed it down to, that it influence our food choices, our decisions, whether it's to eat for one night or really what shapes our entire diet. Now, this is a theoretical question. You don't have to pick one, but let's just say you could only pick one, right? You could only pick the lens of science, right? Unless there's some double-blind, placebo-controlled study about XYZ, you're not touching, right? Maybe. Or what about culture? Or what about others? Right? I'm only going to emulate the healthiest people, right? Whatever they eat, I'm going to do that too. Or you might say, you know what, the highest value is my own intuition, right? Science, oh gosh, it's too much, it's confusing, it's changing all the time. Culture, that's a thing of the past. Other people, my body's different. I'm only going to use my own personal experience and intuition of what works for me. What would you say? Just kind of a theoretical question. Could you pick one? And if you did, which one would you pick as an only lens? You don't need to type it out. Just kind of think about that. Fortunately, we don't have to pick just one. We can utilize all of those lenses, and that's the idea of intelligence, right? Is taking all the information, all the data points, all the perspectives, and integrating them together into one's own personalized approach. Now, I would say if I had to pick one, I would probably do culture. I would follow a cultural diet. Again, reasons of science, yeah, it's great, but there's still so much science doesn't know. Other people, yeah, that could be okay. Personal experience, I don't trust myself enough in that sense, especially back then as a 16-year-old, eating a ton of sugar, eating a lot of food additives, chemicals that we know, influences our brain and our cravings, our emotions, and maybe not the most helpful way. I believe we can get there. We can cleanse our body. We can naturalize our diet. We can optimize our microbiome, that we can be guided from that space. But I think culture, more than anything else, has the most to teach us, right? That idea of looking to the past to be able to move forward into the future. They had it figured out. Was it perfect? No, but it provided and laid such an incredible foundation, right? And all cultures around the world had a healthy diet, successful diet. Otherwise, it would not be here. It is our only modern standard American diet where we have begun to change things in major drastic ways that we're beginning to feel the ill effects. Literally, I bet, I'd be very surprised if there's even a single person on this call that has not dealt with the ill effects of a modern standard American diet, right? On some level or influence, that has been at the core root cause of some sort of illness, short-term or long-term, that we've had to deal with, that we've had to go through. And if we can come back to a more traditional, natural way of eating a diet, we're going to be much better off. And so that's really the core of what we want to look at. And we want to look at these timeless principles. This is just another quick little aside, and then we'll jump right into these 11 principles. So this one I like to teach about. I know many of you have heard this before, the idea of the 4 food groups. Because again, our modern culture, what we get taught in grade 2, Canada Food Guide, the food groups, whatever version you had growing up, has certainly failed us. And there's been attempts to try to improve it over time, but still, ultimately, it has failed us. It is something we do not and should not follow. We need something better, and it's the result of why we're in this situation, en masse that we are, is because we don't have our foundation correct, right? The 4 food groups that we're taught are not it, but it turns out that there are 4 food groups that all humans consume. Traditionally, every single culture around the world consumes plant foods, animal foods, bacterial foods, and fungal foods. So those are your 4 food groups. And what I love about this is that it doesn't tell you what to eat, when to eat, or how much to eat. That's the individual approach that we have. But man, if I'd gotten this, I would have resisted it as a vegetarian, right? I would have argued, animal foods, we don't need that. We don't need to rely on those. But it's true. Think of, any culture that you can that is 100% complete vegan, right? And maybe it was like, that's not a modern, subculture, right? It's like full-on legitimate, vegan culture. It actually doesn't exist. There are vegetarian cultures like the Hindus, probably the most notable, the long-lasting, but they still include animal foods. Name one single culture in the entire world that doesn't eat bacterial foods, that doesn't eat fermented foods, right? They don't exist. So the deeper you dig into this, you realize that this is a core principle. It's a truth about what humans are and what we eat. We are omnivores, right? And to go outside of that to say, you know what, we need to be plant only, we need to be vegan. That's an experiment. And you're welcome to take on the experiment. Maybe it works for you. Maybe it works for you, right? I took on the experiment for several years and I found that it didn't work for me. And I started to observe other people that were doing it, who said they were on that diet. Are they really on that diet? Is that what they do? And how long have they been on that diet? What stage of life are they in? How old are they? Right? There's so many other factors to it, but I began to see that fall away. So I think it's very dangerous. And it's so funny, it's such a 360 that I've come, because I used to be like vigilant, hardcore vegan, religious about it almost. Getting in people's faces, milk is murder, these types of slogans. Because I was so against animal foods. But it was an ideology not based in anything. And I think the real risk that we're moving forward, we're being pushed towards, this pressure on a global scale from these leaders, right? In industry as well, right? Being pushed this kind of plant-only diet is a dangerous one. And I truly believe it's going to end in disaster if we move forward. So let's dive into kind of these 11 principles and some evidence for that. So I'm just going to turn on, do a little screen share here, and then we'll get into it. So let's see, here we are, screen share, a little PowerPoint slideshow here. All right, so we're going to look at and examine the work of Dr. Weston A. Price. I'm sure many of you have heard his name. Maybe you're already familiar with a lot of his work. He laid out these 11 principles. Fascinating man, 1930s. Him and his wife traveled around the world looking at indigenous cultures, traditional peoples. And he was in this unique time period where there was still humans living, I don't want to say uncontacted, because though there are definitely those people at that time, but maybe, unaffected or infiltrated by modern industrial foods, the foods of commerce, as he would describe it. Manufactured foods, industrial foods that were prevalent in certain parts of the world and ever making their way forward. And so he spent a lot of time all over the world. He was in New Zealand, he was in Africa, he was in Scotland, he was in Switzerland, he was in even Canada, up north with the Inuit, tribes in northern BC, and tribes in the southern US, and looking at who they are as a people, how they live, their state of health. And again, at this unique time where modern industrialized foods were beginning to make an entrance into those cultures, whether it was roads being opened up or whatever the case was, and their diets changed, and so too did their physique. That's absolutely fascinating book. And he's got pictures. I'll share some of those with you here, and then we'll really dive into what were those core principles that was unique to every single traditional culture that he studied that gave them that robust health. here's just some examples, right? Like, look at that dude on the right. He puts me, and I'm sure every other, guy on this call to shame. I mean, I don't know how old he is, but I'll give you perspective that the woman on the left that looks absolutely like glowing and beautiful, she's 90, right? And here's an elder on the right who is absolutely ripped, very robust, very healthy, but old in years, but certainly no comparison, to the average person, of our modern society. We think we're so great. We think we're so advanced. And in many ways we are, but has that come as a detriment? And can we not have it both ways? Can we not have that robust physical health again? Well, we've got to shift and change our diet and our lifestyle to be able to get back there. He said that the most universal disease of the world is, anybody want to want to guess what he said the most universal disease of the world is? And he's really got a point because, for me, I have personally, until I thought about this, I would have told you that's like, I've never had surgery, right? I've never had to go to the hospital. I've had a blessed life that way, like no accidents, no chronic disease that's taken me, that far to the point where I needed, medical intervention. And yet, once I was like, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, almost since day one, this is what happened to me. The decay of the teeth, right? And if we were to do a survey, and you don't need to share, but I bet you upwards of 90 or 95% of us on this call, maybe even 100%, I won't say 100%, but maybe most of us have had decay of the teeth, right? Literal like cavities, or we've had root canals, we've had extractions, or maybe you've had to have, braces, wisdom teeth pulled out. Now, do you think that is natural, right? It's just like, for anybody that's religious, we can put it in this context, right? Is that how we were created? If we were created perfect, if we were created in the image of God, would we be born in a way that like we need to extract? These teeth aren't meant to be there, right? Oh, you got all this like crowding, got issues. We need to fix that. Or is that a result of our diet and our lifestyle? And this is something that Wesley Price, I believe, truly demonstrated. Again, there was that unique time in the world where he was able to do that. Okay, one just quick second here. Let's go ahead. Oh, there it is. Okay, 1 second here. I think we got someone else just to let in here. Yeah, we got 2 more folks to let in. And let's go back to screen share. All right. Sorry, my computer's being funny in the sense that I can't do the screen share and navigate the Zoom buttons. But there we are. Okay. All right. So like I mentioned, he went all around the world and photographing. So this is the book that he wrote, and there's lots of great photographs in here, like I have up on the top, demonstrating these people who lived naturally, who ate a natural diet, and we'll get into what that means and what is involved in that. Actually had very, very good teeth. By all measures of a dentist, right? The arch is good. They've got good jaw formation and structure. Very, very, very few dental cavities. I don't want to say they had none, but very, 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 very few. Same people, the advent of modern industrialized foods, white flour, white sugar, canned foods, pasteurized milk, these kinds of things, as that started to creep in, he noticed right away right? From those that were eating that type of diet, look at their teeth. And I know that might seem a little bit shocking, a little bit gruesome, and just like, whoa, like, especially in, if you look, well, no one's teeth around here looks like that. Well, that's because we've all had cosmetic surgery, right? Like, I'm sure my teeth would have looked like that I was the kind of kid that, it would just happen. I love candy, I love sugar. Was on a very poor diet, but almost every dental trip, 2 or 3 cavities, 4 cavities, 5 cavities, a mouthful as a kid that continued into my adulthood. And it was actually one of the big things that really pushed me away. And I knew I had to shift away from a vegetarian and vegan diet because my teeth were still bad. I knew that, genetically, okay, great, I've got issues. My parents both have bad teeth. Interestingly enough, my brother, he's never had a cavity. And we can actually get into that. There's something it's outlined in this book here, and Leslie Price talked about as well. This book's called Deep Nutrition, where the firstborn gets more of the nutrients from the parent, and then it requires that replenishment. So just a little aside. So I bet you a lot of us in our society, our culture, if we didn't have this, the blessing, the medical wonder of modern dentistry, our teeth would look like that too, right? Had we not access to dentistry to kind of cosmetically fixing them, it's very likely. But, as is shown, these people without access to modern dentistry on traditional diet, traditional foods, very, 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 very few issues with teeth, actually beautiful teeth, beautiful structure, everything. So these folks are from New Zealand, right? And boom, here's the introduction. Those that started eating the modern foods very quickly, instantly went down. And it wasn't just dental structure and teeth health. He was also noting other physical deformities as well. That, and here's the optimistic part, that can be remedied and reversed. So it's not all doom and gloom here. All right. Well, I'm noticing that. See, my apologies. My Zoom is doing funny things here again. Oh, there we go. Great. Okay, so here's kind of a comparison up and down. Samoan, as you described, primitives up top, right? And then those who had modernized eating the foods, you're starting to crowd, right? That would be that classic, well, we need to give you braces. This is the Gaelic people and the Hebrides, right? There's 2 brothers up on top, apparently lived under the same roof. The older brother eating the traditional diet, younger brother eating the modern foods, you can tell. Yeah, dental decay. So this is just a little graph of just some of those cultures. So it wasn't like that there was 0 issues, but major, major, major difference, regardless of the culture that he lived with, studied, spent time with. Anybody who took on that modern food, a major, major decrease to what we have now, right? And, there's that saying, never look a gift horse in the mouth, because you can tell a lot by someone's health through the teeth and their stock, their genetics, how kind of robust they are genetically. And obviously we can see in our society, our culture, as we know, right, dental issues are so huge, they're so prevalent. And we think just by adding fluoride to the water, it's going to solve it, it's going to help. It's not. There's something so much deeper and fundamental that has gone way beyond that, right? Diabetes, obesity, heart disease. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on. And we know it is diet and lifestyle related. So what are those key 11 principles of traditional diets, right? Where every single culture around the world unanimously, it's the depth of this: plants, animals, bacteria, fungi, right? Those as the 4 food groups. There's absolute keys and common characteristics. So this is not prescriptive. There's nothing, he's not going to, you're going to leave here with a list going, I must eat X, Y, and Z, but you're going to get a lot deeper insight and a much broader insight to know, okay, here's the types of foods I need to include. And then based upon all those individual personal factors, you can now make better choices and have that solid foundation. All right, so the diets of healthy, non-industrialized peoples contain no refined or denatured foods or ingredients, such as refined sugar or high fructose corn syrup, white flour, no canned food, no pasteurized, homogenized, skim, or low-fat milk, no refined or hydrogenated oils, no protein powders, no synthetic vitamins or toxic additives and artificial colorings. Pretty obvious, right? Because they didn't have access to that. And as those foods started to become available, right? Roads opened up. People left the little villages, went to the cities. As soon as they got exposed to these, modern foods, that's where the problems started showing up. And, unfortunately, and I can't blame them, right? Like, I've done a lot of traveling, been blessed to do that. And my mother-in-law, she currently lives in Ecuador, and she's been there for 10 years or so, and we spent time down there with her. And there's this among the kind of the indigenous population, the native people down there. There's a real kind of desire to modernize, right? And in that, they are moving away from their traditional diet, because the traditional diet is seen as being backwards, right? They want to advance their position in life. They want to be more comfortable. They want to, have what modern humans have and enjoy. I mean, I heard an anecdote that if they ever find like a tribe in the Amazon, right, uncontacted, you see, just kind of wearing grass skirts and this kind of thing. One of the first things they want, that they're interested in, is clothes. So there's so much about our modern lifestyle that makes it enjoyable, that makes it comfortable, that kind of create that buffer from the elements. But so, I'm not blaming anybody. I get that there's this kind of cultural sense that they want to modernize, and in that pursuit, they're kind of moving away from their traditional diets, right? Because to be modern is to drink Coke, and is to do all the things that you see on the TV and the movies and the magazines, and is in the stores and that type of thing, and you can see the result of it. So here's the second principle. All traditional cultures consume some sort of animal food. So such as fish, shellfish, land and waterfowl, land and sea mammals, eggs, milk and milk products, reptiles, and insects. So that's that idea that animal foods are key. As humans, we're omnivores. We're meaning we eat everything, right? And though we might, for a time, we might try to be carnivores, we might try to be herbivores, but ultimately we're omnivores, right? And there's always the very, very odd exception of, that one person you've known for 40 years, well, they're completely, vegetarian, vegan. That even can be argued too, in terms of, well, are they really? And just because they did it and they've done it doesn't mean that you can or someone else can. I mean, that's one thing. So many people over the years that I've noticed, having kind of been at the core of it, aspiring to be vegetarian, to be vegan for all the right reasons, whether it's animal, cruelty, environmental aspirations, save the planet, for personal health reasons that we may be sold, that it's healthier. whatever it is, eventually I've always seen people kind of get off that path and come back to some sort of animal food nourishment. And, even on a much deeper level, agriculture, right? Or a more holistic form of that, something like permaculture, regenerative agriculture, requires animal input, right? There's no such thing as vegan farming, right? Unless you're going to rely on, and even the vegan diet heavily relies on petrochemicals, right? Whether for fertilizers, for growing, for transporting, on and on and on. So there's all these trade-offs, and it's a bit of an illusion that it's even possible. So, what this doesn't tell you to do is eat beef, right? If you don't like beef, or it's not your thing, or you don't like red meat, or you can't digest milk, no problem, right? There's something else, because each of these food groups offers something unique to it that the other doesn't, right? You can't get from the bacterial kingdom what you can get from the animal kingdom, or from the fungal kingdom, you can't get it from the plant kingdom. So we need to consume foods, have an input from each of these food groups. There's something unique and essential in each of those that humans require. And we can maybe try and supplement our way out of it, but ultimately, in the end, there's inputs from each of those kingdoms that's 100% absolutely required as omnivores to consume. And this is the key part. The whole animal is consumed, right? We're into whole foods. That was my journey. Still is. Totally into whole foods. But as I shifted, and I saw many other people shift, from vegetarian to vegan, or just kind of, common, like everyday, like meat eaters, never change their diet, right? It's like, where's the whole animal, right? You're just eating chicken breast, or you're just eating steaks, or you're just eating, ground meat. The bones, right? That's coming back more into trend. The organs, that fat, right? The skin, all those things, key and essential, and they actually provide nutrients that are whole and complementary and essential. So, in fact, as it says here, the organ meats and the fats were preferred. The original inception of the Canada Food Guide, in fact, even had in it, cod liver oil. It recommended liver as a part of it. It still had some of that thread of traditional food wisdom of how essential that was. And again, I think in our kind of, modernization or an ascension of affluence, right? There was this kind of arrogance of like, well, I don't need to eat, the offal, the offcuts. I will have the prime choice, the prime rib, right? Because I'm wealthy enough to do it. I can waste the animal. Whereas before it was out of necessity, as well as a deep inner knowing that of how key and how essential it was to human health. So we're coming back to that. All right, the diets of healthy, non-industrialized peoples contain at least 4 times the minerals and water-soluble vitamins and 10 times the fat-soluble vitamins found in as the average American diet, right? And even, again, we can take that measurement now, or as Weston Price did back then in the early 1900s, just comparing traditional people's diets, right? Because he was seeing it as a dentist. So clearly, wow, those that have adapted, these modern foods compared to those consuming the traditional foods, what's the difference? Well, this was the difference. Way more nutrient dense. The diets of healthy, non-industrialized peoples contain at least 4 times the minerals and water-soluble vitamins. Oh yeah, sorry. And those key fat-soluble vitamins, I just want to highlight that vitamin A, vitamin D, and then activator X, which is thought to be vitamin K2. One of the arguments, that I had as a vegetarian was, wow, vitamin A, you get that from beta carotene. Well, that's very different than what's called true vitamin A or provitamin A. The fat-soluble version, which we convert in our bodies, or animals convert. The true vitamin A is way, way, way more potent and effective in the body, and it's already converted for you, right? So that conversion, so if you're going to consume carotenoid-rich foods, so those colors, right? Carrots, like in sweet potatoes and yams and broccoli, and those color-rich pigments. Traditionally, the idea of adding a fat, like lathering it with butter, that fat is needed in that conversion to be able to convert it to the provitamin A, stuff that we actually truly. There's a role for beta carotene, but it's different than vitamin A. Vitamin D, pretty clear in that one. Tons of research around that, the importance of it, and everyone's all about supplementing. And there's a time and a place for supplementation. Obviously, the people that Weston A. Price was studying didn't have access to that. It was in the foods, right? And I think we can get it from food. We should be getting it from food first and foremost before looking at supplementation. The vitamin A, the vitamin B, and vitamin K2, they work synergistically together and concentrated in the fats and the organs. That's why those foods were preferential. All right, next principle. All traditional cultures cooked some of their food, but all consumed a portion of their animal foods raw. So regardless, whether it's raw milk, raw eggs, or the products of raw milk, like raw cheese, even the organ meats or muscle meats, steak tartare, we should be getting raw animal foods into our diet. Again, that's based upon observation from starting with Weston A. Price, looking at all these different cultures that they all had in common that maintain that robust health. Primitive and traditional diets have a high content of food enzymes and beneficial bacteria from lacto-fermented vegetables, fruits, beverages, dairy products, meats, and condiments, right? So in that raw animal food, sometimes it was literally just fresh, raw as it was, and more often than not, it was also fermented. And so that's kind of where this part of the equation, the bacteria and the fungal foods come in, where we utilize these organisms to ferment, to transform plants and animal foods, to pre-digest, to break them down, to add enzymes to them. Not to mention, the bacteria themselves were also sources of nutrients. Bacteria is a source of protein, a lot of the byproducts of their metabolism, B vitamins. And that term lacto-fermented doesn't mean dairy. It means lactic acid producing bacteria, right? So it's the lacto-fermentation of vegetables, which are ubiquitous around the world. And this is an observation that Weston A. Price made, people like Sandor Katz, who describes himself as a fermentation revivalist. And he's really taken on just this one aspect of traditional foods, traditional diets, fermentation, right? And he's really inspiring as many people as he possibly can to bring fermented foods back into our daily diet, because it is so key and it's so essential. And yet, in our modern diet, modern society, we moved away from that for all the reasons, right? It's like, well, we have refrigeration, we have canning, we have 24/7, 365, access and availability through the grocery store. We don't need this. We don't need to do it. And we moved away from it. But key, very essential. You need to be fermenting your own food, consuming it for those enzymes, for those bacteria, and also a pre-digestion of a lot of those nutrients. Okay, next one here. Slideshow and Zoom are not doing well together. There we go. Okay, that's it. All right, so this next one related to the last, seeds, grains, and nuts, they're soaked, they're sprouted, fermented, or naturally leavened to neutralize the naturally occurring anti-nutrients such as enzyme inhibitors, tannins, and phytic acid. So this is a key thing. And, you know, when I was doing the whole plant-based, you know, raw vegan, that type of thing, eating tons of nuts and seeds and grains, because that was the foundation of the calories that I was, you know, within the food choices allowing myself. But though I did a lot of soaking, sprouting, and fermenting, I missed out on a lot of that. And of course, growing up, I hardly ate any of those items fermented, soaked, or sprouted, right? I mean, it was Wonder Bread, and then it was, you know, just regular white bread, and, you know, whole wheat. Even when I moved to whole wheat, thinking, well, that's a better choice. You got to go more the brown bread. You know, wasn't soaked, wasn't sprouted, wasn't fermented, and that has real world consequences, detriments to our health because of those things. The enzyme inhibitors, these are natural protective mechanisms of the plants, right? This is their, you know, when they have a seed, a grain, a nut, these are the seeds, this is the future offspring, and these are protective mechanisms. So it will only release its nutrients when the conditions are right, i.e., okay, I'm ready to sprout. I sense moisture. I sense these conditions. Now I'm going to optimize into my life cycle. And that's the whole idea around soaking and sprouting, is not only releasing things like the enzyme inhibitors, but also optimizing the nutrition, right? For a plant, it's got the most amount of life force, the most nutrients in its sprout stage. And traditional people knew this, and that's why they process their food in such a way. And the fermentation is absolutely key as well. So every single culture around the world fermented its own food. And I'll just do a quick little plug. If you haven't learned and you want to learn, we've got the 4th annual Calgary Fermentation Festival coming up. It's going to happen starting next week on the 14th, and it's going to run until the 21st. So every night we're going to have 2 sessions a night, and we're focusing on a different area of either recipes, fermentation, or kind of the research about, you know, the gut-brain connection, microbiome, and how that's all related, and really get you further down the path of fermentation. Because like with all these principles, a lot of it's relearning. It's like, oh, wait, okay, that's how humans are meant to, that's how we're meant to process our food. Not necessarily how we've been taught or how it's been presented. So this is a journey. This is a relearning, rediscovering how to eat and how to prepare food. And fermentation is so huge and a part of that. So just a quick little plug, if you want to join us, that would really, whether you're brand new or you're already a few steps or even, you know, a while down the path, this will help move you even further. And the best thing about it, it's fun, right? Like getting into fermenting, getting into this like type of food preparation. It's fun, it's health enhancing, and it's delicious too. So, all right. Okay, next slide. A bit of a delay here. There we are. Okay. Total fat content of traditional diets ranges from 30% to 80% of calories, but only 4% of calories comes from polyunsaturated oils naturally occurring in grains, legumes, nuts, fish, animal fats, and vegetables. The balance of fat calories in the form of saturated and monounsaturated fats. So, I mean, this is the complete inverse of what we're taught, and how most people eat, you know, vegetable oil, which is not even from vegetables, it's from soybean, it's from corn. Yeah, absolutely toxic. And this is really what's damaging people's health, is these polyunsaturated oils, how, you know, not only the source, but how they're made and processed. It is a real danger, and so damaging to your health. You can see the results of it. The more that we've moved away from good quality saturated fats, from these monounsaturated fatty acids, like olive oil, like, natural, traditional fats and oils, the worse our health has got as well. So we got to move back to that. And, there's that saying, it's not the cow, it's the how. So, selection and sourcing 100% absolutely matters. You hear that term grass-fed, grass-finished, right? Butter from grass-fed cows is completely different nutrient profile specifically to these omega oils than it is to a grain-fed or grass and grain supplemented dairy cow. Traditional diets contain nearly equal amounts of omega-6 and omega-3. I don't know off the top of my head what the statistics are, but again, modern human industrialized diet, it's way higher in omega-6 from things like seed oils, grain oils, completely out of balance, and the diet that we're feeding chickens, the diet that we're feeding cows, the diet we're feeding pigs, and then the foods that we're consuming from them. Way higher in more inflammatory omega-6 versus the anti-inflammatory omega-3s, and these long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, EPA, DHA, so critical to brain health, brain development, and teeth health as well. All traditional diets contain some salt, right? There's another nutrient that's been demonized over the years. And this is something, I had to relearn as well, right? I grew up in a household, salt was never on the table. Oh, I don't add salt, right? Oh, that's unhealthy. Just as the same, I thought fats were unhealthy. We rarely ate salad, but when we did, there was never any oil. I grew up, it was probably a good thing in the sense that I'd never eaten a conventional salad dressing, right? It was like Thousand Islands and ranch and all that stuff. I still to this day, I've never tasted those things. It just was not how I was raised, not what I ate, but it was from the perspective that oil is bad, salt is bad, and we shouldn't put that on our food. But as we're learning, it's kind of like it's not the cow, it's the how. It's the source, it's the quality. So we need natural sources of salt, whole salts from the land or from the ocean, versus the kind of manufactured sodium chloride with some iodine, right? That's what causes issues. All traditional cultures make use of animal bones, usually in the form of gelatin-rich bone broths. So, yeah, that's key. And unfortunately, there is a trend back to that, right? The whole kind of bone broth trend and craze. And still, very, very cheap, very accessible, and deeply nourishing. We've actually been doing some kind of stocking up for the winter, which our family, it's what we do every year in my household. And we're always kind of taking it deeper and adding more to what we do. And this year, we actually are doing a lot of stock because, we typically, we'll buy in bulk, so we'll buy a half a cow or, a whole lamb or, these types of things. And so our freezer can get quite full. And, I had a bunch of bones that I was still working my way through, and we needed to make some room for, the next load that was going in. And, it was too much to make all this broth and freeze it. And it was too much to make all this broth and kind of can it. So what we did is we reduced it down and put it into kind of these little cubes, like, the idea of like a bouillon cube. These are kind of still, we added some gelatin and that type of thing, but super thick. So just concentrated it and saves on space. So it's relearning all these things and how to process and prepare our foods in an efficient way that we can, do it to save money, but it's also food security and it's deep nourishment. Okay, traditional cultures make provisions for health, future generations by providing special nutrient-rich animal foods for parents-to-be, for pregnant women and growing children, and by proper spacing of children. and of course by teaching the principles of right diet to the young, which we hardly do in our modern society. And again, we can kind of see the effects of that. So going back to these traditional cultures, what did they do? What were they feeding these people? What were their kind of rites of passage that they had, special diets that they're on for parents to be? And how long was it? Both man and woman for 6 months pre-conception, and then for the mother while she was breastfeeding, and then that time to replenish. So I mentioned that kind of difference between my brother and I, which this book, Deep Nutrition, goes into, where she'll show pictures of firstborn versus secondborn. Parents that don't know, and we can see it in animals, right? Like the runt, the end of the litter, the last one that really just didn't get the nutrition. I mean, that's what happens in the animal world, but as humans, we have that opportunity to kind of, stop, replenish, rebuild, and then have another child. So we never run into that kind of runt type of circumstance. But absolutely, it shows up. My brother, he's got stronger health, just naturally, I believe, because he was the firstborn. And my mother, didn't know that she needed to replenish and rebuild before she had me to kind of, restock up on those nutrients. All right, I'm going to stop the screen share there. I can go back to some of those comments. So, yeah, thanks everyone for typing along. I had a couple issues there just with my computer and the Zoom and PowerPoint interface, but what I'll do is I'll send that out as kind of a little PDF tomorrow, as well as the recording. But happy just to kind of open it up right now. That's all I had prepared, all I had planned, and I truly believe like this is the foundation. If we can get this right, again, it's not prescriptive based upon your own individual circumstance, keeping these principles, keeping this type of idea in mind, we can build a much greater, more robust health that, moving forward into the future, we're going to have greater confidence, less confusion, and more resilience. And it's truly what the whole human population needs. But hey, we each have to come to this in our own way and, build and fortify ourselves and our communities, just one person at a time. Okay, yeah, Jacqueline asks, would you say these principles are closest to the paleo diet? Yeah, probably, right? Certainly more so than you can't get farther than this than in the vegan or the vegetarian diet. So I think the paleo is probably the closest. Now, there's a whole kind of society based around, it's called the Weston A. Price Foundation. And there are certain chapters here around the world, like Calgary's got a local chapter, people you can connect with. And, there's one question about where do you source your meats? You can get connected to various farmers. So I've got a few resources that I can share in terms of sourcing. So maybe I'll include that in the notes. And then one kind of just going to put it out there. I'm happy to share, in kind of a follow-up. Is there anything from what we covered tonight that you want to go deeper into? So maybe it is sourcing, right? I could see that maybe being a challenge. I'd be able to do it, right? So what are some other topics? Is one of your challenges like sourcing meat as an example, right? Or getting connected to local farmers. Maybe the next problem, I know the thing that I'm still working on, still learning is how to work with it, right? When you first receive heart in a bag, like, well, what do I do with this? Or how do I cook liver in a way that I'm actually going to enjoy it and make sure I eat it on a regular basis? Or how do I prepare bone broth in various different ways? So if there's anything, just feel free to kind of type that in, and we can kind of come up with some certain areas of topics that I can go deeper into from what learned so far. Okay, sourcing would be great. Connecting with local farmers. Yeah. Only small fridge freezer. Yeah, totally get that. You can get where it can get small amounts. Corey's asking about a schedule for the fermentation course that's coming up. It's on lightcellar.ca. I'll post a little link down here below, but you just go to live events. And I'll just type that in. And Fermentation Festival, we've got a list of the classes and the sessions that are included in that. And then of course, we know it's a lot, but it'll all be recorded. So if you miss a session or can't make it, then you'll have that recording so you can kind of refer back to it anytime. And just so you know, we've had the early bird going for a couple of weeks now, and that just ended yesterday. So what I'll do is I'll include a discount so you can kind of go back to the early bird, which will make it basically $100 to join, which is like less than $10 a session, for like a good deep dive workshop with specific recipe topic. All right, so Julian, healthy seeds for planting, great. Love to have more information on food stability, pantry, like canning based on traditional diets. Okay, awesome. Eating with the seasons. Okay, great. Info on concentrating bone broths. Yeah, okay. Okay, so Kathy asked, what is food stability pantry exactly? So I'm not sure if you're asking Barbara, but my own interpretation of that is, it's one of the original inspirations of the name that I created, light cellar. This idea of having your own, cellar, which in some contexts can be challenging. If you live in a condo or a small place, how can you really have a nice good store of food? But I think that's, a wrong turn that we took as a culture, is not having that store of food, preparing for the winter as we always have generations after generations. We become too reliant, too dependent on the grocery store and convenience. And I get it. It's just, it is the way it is, and it's the direction we've taken. And sometimes it's a necessity based upon space. But when I hear those words, food stability, having a pantry, having at least 3 months or 6 months worth of food. I was listening to a talk the other day, and this guy, he's like, I remember when I was a kid, it was like it was like national pride that, the nation had X number of weeks of food, right? People as communities used to come together to build that store, and what do we have now? 3 days, they say, in a crisis. I mean, that would evaporate in hours. People's kind of panic buying. So that's what I think of. All right, where's a good place to buy organic fruits, sourcing, and then the storing, nutritional value of freeze-dried food storage. Yeah, nose to tail eating, further than sourcing. Great. Okay, well that gives me some good ideas of where the interest is at. I'm not going to go into all that right now because we're just doing like an hour session focusing on where these kind of core principles of the direction we should be heading in our diet. And I'll do a follow-up. And if you want to join, awesome. Information will be there. I'll put out a couple of dates and then options of topics, and then we'll kind of go from there. So, all right. Well, thanks a lot, Wes, Jacqueline, Carol, Heflick, I don't see a full name there. Donna, Jamie, Rose. Yeah, thanks everyone for being on the call this evening. Yeah, it was just short, it was informal, just wanted to share, and yeah, appreciate you guys. So thanks Sarah and Corey, thanks everybody. Yeah, Jesse. Good. All right, wonderful. Lydia, Brianne, Donna, Dolores, Barbara. Yeah, I appreciate you all. Thank you. Thank you. So you guys have a good night. Stay well, stay healthy, and I'll send up a follow-up email. We'll set something else up.